if somebody dies at the same time somebody else in the family is pregnant, the child born of that pregnancy will very often be the deceased.
Today's guest is Jim Matlock. Jim is an anthropologist and a leading reincarnation researcher. Can you tell me how you got into this?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I always wanted to be a creative writer from when I was very young. I remember dictating stories to my mother. Actually, before I could write, I was dictating her stories. So that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to write fiction, and I held to that through college. But when I got out of school, I found I really couldn't make a living at it. It was harder than I expected, and so I was looking around for a nonfiction topic that I could write about. And I went to my local library. I was living in Arlington, Virginia at the time. I went to my local library there. And I had gotten interested in sort of in New Age topics. So I was looking in that section. And I came across books on reincarnation, which is something I really didn't know anything about at the time. We're talking about late 70s, around 1980. I really didn't know anything about, but wanting to be a writer, I had majored in English actually, and so I'd read a lot of literature, right? And the rebirth theme or reincarnation theme kept coming up and intrigued me. I didn't really know much of anything about it, but so I decided that that was something that interested me enough to do some research and maybe write something about. That's how it started. And then once I started reading and found Ian Stevenson's work, that led me into academic parapsychology. And once I found that, I was really stuck. That was by the mid '80s. I was already beginning to make professional contributions in parapsychology. So I've been with it ever since then.
Tell us about your resume.
Well, okay. I have a PhD in anthropology, but that came late. Um, I actually, as I started off, as I said, I wanted to be a writer. And so I didn't go for graduate degrees immediately. But once I got interested in the reincarnation research, I did get involved in academic parapsychology and started, doing that sort of research and writing and connecting with people. And that, I guess, is part of this, along with this, I should say. At the same time, I realized I needed something to make a living at, and so I went to library school. I got a master's in library science. And that led me, along with my growing interest in parapsychology, to get a job at the American Society for Psychical Research as librarian and archivist there in Manhattan. And so I moved to New York, and that was great because the ASPR was a central place globally for people interested in this subject matter. And so I met a lot of people through that. And gradually I began to realize that yeah, I mean, librarianship was nice, but I really wanted to do my own research, right? Helping people with theirs was good. And it got me out of my introversion a little bit, which is good. But I wanted to do my own research, and so I decided then to go into to anthropology because when I was in college, I had ended up minoring, thought about double majoring for a while in psychology, um, and I got turned off to it. Because at the time it was still behaviorism, and that I just did not want graduate studies in psychology, so I chose anthropology, which turned out to be actually quite a good field for what I was interested in because as I began to study reincarnation beliefs in anthropology, I found that they're really very widespread. Indigenous societies all over the world have reincarnation beliefs. And then I ended up doing a master's thesis on that, a cross-cultural study of that, of reincarnation beliefs in tribal societies. And I found about 50% of them, a lot, had reincarnation beliefs. And more than the beliefs, what I found was that the beliefs were associated with the same kinds of phenomena that Ian Stevenson was studying as evidence of reincarnation, right? I mean, we'll get into talking about what that evidence amounted to, but that really struck me. I mean, and what it meant to me was that, hey, these cases that Stevenson had been studying since the 1960s that I was now beginning to study were not new. I mean, this was not a new phenomenon, right? This was something that goes way back in time. And so that added to my intrigue about all of this, and is one reason why I've stayed with it all these years.
Essentially, it goes back to the beginning of time.
Well, yes, I think it goes back to the beginning. Reincarnation goes back to the beginning of life. As soon as there was life and death, I think there was the survival of the consciousness that animated an organism, and that survival led to a reaffiliation with an organism. That is what we now call reincarnation. Right. I
Can,
think it goes all the way back.
how does one research reincarnation?
Still following Stevenson's lead, and what he did is go out into the field and investigate cases. That is, cases of typically young children, although it can be adults too, now we now know, who remember previous lives. So they have these past life memories. And this in Stevenson's day in the 1960s, these cases were not very well known. Nowadays, with social media, they're shared very broadly. And so many more people are aware of them. But in the 60s, they were not well known. And in the 60s, you didn't have the possibilities. Now you have the internet, Zoom and forums like this to talk with people, research cases. So he actually had to go out. And in 1961, he went to India and Ceylon, as Sri Lanka was known then, on his first tour of investigation. And that was when it really started. And what he did is go and interview the children's families, more than the children themselves, their families, about what the children had talked about when they were very young, beginning at maybe ages 2 and 3. I mean, so they couldn't necessarily remember what they said then, right? If they had gotten older. But their parents still did, right? So we interviewed the parents, and then it turned out very often the children had said enough and given names and enough details that the lives that they were talking about actually could be identified. And in India, the lives they were talking about, it turned out, ended not long in the past, only a few months, a few years. And that meant that it was very easy to track down the people that the kids said they were. Right. So Stevenson's research is based on that, interviewing the families, interviewing the subjects of the cases sometimes, but more often their families or others who heard them talk about their memories, and then verifying the memories. And when it's possible to verify the memories, it turns out that it's not just memories, right? Or things that we think of as memories. It's also behaviors, it's personalities, it's sometimes it's physical things which carried over to across lives. So it's much more than simply a memory, right? It's a full, or it's more than just an episodic memory, an autobiographical memory. It's a full-fledged emotional memory, behavioral memory, all of the elements of personal identity become part of it.
Does past life regression come into the research?
Not the research that I do, not the research that Stevenson did. He started off being interested in regression, but he didn't. He gave it up because he found it not really very useful at all. Most of the children that he tried to hypnotize, get back, he didn't retrieve any memories of that. With adults, when he had these hypnotic memories, he couldn't verify them like with the kids. So he gave up with their regression stuff pretty early and came to really to think there wasn't much to it.
Do you have a favorite reincarnation story?
Well, the one I like to use when I'm asked that is one I investigated myself and wrote about in one of my books, Signs of Reincarnation. In the case of Rylan O'Banion, who is an American girl living in Oklahoma. And some people may recognize the name because she was also on the show Ghosts Inside My Child. She was in the second episode of that. But I learned about her case through my Facebook group a few years later after that. And I interviewed her when she was 10, several years after she was on Ghost Inside My Child. So I was able to update the case. It's an interesting case because when she was very young, and again, I'm talking 2 to 3, she displayed all of these sort of post-traumatic type symptoms, right? she seemed to be remembering something. She started off as, as an ideal child, and then she became a problem child, wanting tags cut out of her shirts, saying they bothered her, sleepwalking, not being able to sleep through the night. And so forth. And it was very difficult for her family for a while. And they didn't know what was going on, and neither did she really. This behavior sort of went on for a while, for several years actually, until there was an occasion that her mother decided she wanted to have formal portraits taken of the family. So she had a photographer come in, and they took photographs of the whole family, including Ryland, both inside and outside the house. Well, one of the photographs outside the house, it shows Ryland just totally aghast. She's staring at something obviously that really terrifies her, that scares her or something. She was standing in her yard and she's looking at this tree. You can't see that. It's a picture just of her. But okay, so her mother had these photographs taken and that one, and she framed them, each of them, and put them in different places. That particular one she took to her office. Whenever Ryland went to the office and saw that picture, she would tell her mother, I was bigger in that picture, which made no sense to her mother. How could you be bigger in your picture, right? And she kept saying this and saying this and saying this. And it was again, this went on for a long time until one night when she was almost 6, her mother was reading her a story, a bedtime story. And having finished that, turned off the light, and Raylan, in the dark, said to her mother, do you remember that picture where I was bigger? And her mother starts saying, again, how could you be bigger and so forth? And Raylan at that point says, she remembered something. She said, I died. And what it turns out was that when the picture was taken, she was looking at a scene which reminded her of her previous death. Now that still didn't become clear for a while, but this is what she was beginning to remember. And she told her mother at that point that she thought at that point that she had been killed by lightning. She said, I was standing in our yard. She still thinks it's, and I was hit by lightning. Well, now after that point, she started talking a little bit more about her memories, right? And she started saying things like, she's mentioning Canada over and over, mentioning other things repeated. She mentioned the name Jennifer from time to time. Then, when she was 6, she told her mother, and she also asked her about the date 1971, whether that meant anything to her mother. So then she comes out with, I died in a plane crash. Not that or she remembered a plane crash. She didn't say she died in a plane crash. She just remembered a plane crashing. So that was the last clue her mother needed then to go to the internet and look for plane crashes. So she looked for plane crashes in Canada, the plane crashes in 1971. The girl had also mentioned Louisiana. So she looked for plane crashes in Louisiana. And then bingo, finally. There was not a plane crash in Louisiana in 1971. But there was a plane crash in 1983 in Kenner, Louisiana, not Canada, Kenner. So it's sort of simpler, right? And it turns out that crash in 1983 was a major event. It was a Pan Am plane that took off from the New Orleans International Airport, came down, and this is the story that's in Ghost Inside My Child, came down within a mile of the runway, took out 6 houses on 3 blocks. The first house that it hit, or it killed 6 people on the ground. I'm sorry. I don't remember how many, 11 houses. It killed 6 people on the ground. That's where the 6th comes in. One of whom was a girl named Jennifer. Remember, Jennifer was one of the names that she had mentioned. Jennifer was born in 1971. Okay. So the pieces began to fit together. So the ghost inside my child people took her back to Kenner, Louisiana, right? Where she met the neighbor across the street who was still there because her house was totally demolished. Jennifer's house was. But she met the neighbor and seemed to bond with her. Anyway, by the time I talked to Rylan a few years later, she had had additional memories come out. And what she told me then when I interviewed her was that what she then recalled was sitting in her carport, watching this plane come towards the house, come towards her. And she was talking on the telephone in the carport. Now, this is 1983. This is not cell phones. This would have been a phone on a long phone line coming out of the house, coming out of the door into the carport. You have to imagine that. All right. Now, the plane, it turns out, in coming to the house, it would have cut through a power line and a telephone line. It would have had to have. It did. When I was there, I could see the power lines and the telephone lines. It had been reconstructed running right in front of the house. Because one of the things that we do when we investigate these cases is then go and interview people on the other side, right? So I went to Kenner and interviewed the neighbor and her friends of Jennifer and so forth. I also got hold of Jennifer's autopsy report. Okay. And the autopsy report was very, very interesting because when I talked to Jennifer's friends, they did not know what had happened to Jennifer's body. And you have to imagine, I mean, at the time, this was such a big thing. Jennifer's body took 3 days to be discovered. And 3 days is an awfully long time in the news cycle, right? By 3 days, the news has moved on to something else. And I looked at all the news stories that were written about this, and none of them describe what happened to Jennifer's body. None of them even say that it was found. Her friends did not know either. But the autopsy report says that her body was recovered from the floor of the carport. So Jennifer actually died in the carport. The autopsy report also said that there was no sign of smoke inhalation from the fire that engulfed the house after the plane hit it. There was no discoloration of her blood. What that meant was Jennifer had to be dead before the plane hit the house, before the fire engulfed the house, right? So what Ryland told me is that she remembered sitting in the swing on the carport, watching this plane come towards her. And then all of a sudden she was electrocuted over the telephone line, she said. That makes sense in terms of the autopsy report, because if she was indeed electrocuted over the telephone line, then she would have been dead before that plane hit her. So everything that Ryland remembered when she talked to me when she was 10 fit the autopsy report, but was not recorded anywhere in the news, and it was not remembered by none of our friends knew it. They couldn't tell me this. Anyway, so yeah, there are details. I'm not going to go on longer about this, but it's a very interesting case, and it's a very powerful evidential case because of that.
I want to get your opinion on Dorothy
Edie.
Eddie? Yes. Can I get your opinion on that and kind of tell the backstory of that to the viewers?
Sure. And that's a British case, early 20th century British case. Dorothy Edie, as a young child, fell down some stairs, and they were afraid that she was killed. And they called the doctor came in who pronounced her dead, and then I believe they called in a priest too. But she revived. She came back. She wasn't dead. At most, maybe she had a near-death experience, but she didn't talk about that. But when she came back, not as a new person, she was still her old self, but she had new memories. She started after that having these memories of Egypt, of ancient Egypt. And she became really fascinated by ancient Egypt. seemed to know things in the British Museum and so forth. So fascinated that as an adult, she actually moved to Egypt. And in Egypt, she got, even though she had no training in archaeology, she got involved with the archaeologists there, helped them find certain things that, you know, perhaps were based on these past life memories that she felt that she had. It is a fascinating story because, because she was able to help them find things that they didn't know, nobody suspected was there. And she was able to lead them to that. It interests me for other reasons too. One of the things that I found is that after near-death experiences, and remember, she didn't have a near-death experience as such, as we talk about it now. I mean, she didn't remember things that happened while she was out, but she did have this experience of nearly dying and then reviving, which is what we get in near-death experiences, right? And what I've found is in near-death experiences, often after them, people start having past life memories. And so she fits that pattern. So people will have sometimes they've had past life memories before the NDEs and they just become stronger after the NDEs. But at any rate, something about the NDE or the nearly dying or something in that whole process seems to facilitate the retrieval of the past life memory.
What do you think the purpose of reincarnation is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So remember, reincarnation, in my view, goes way back, right? All life reincarnates. So when we ask that question, we need to think, what could reincarnation give to all life, right? So part of it, I think an important part of coming back. And so part of it may be simply a conservation of consciousness, right? And as simple as that. Conservation of energy, conservation of consciousness. Consciousness never dies, it just returns to a new body. And it may be no more than that, but I think it is more than that. I think that one of the things that reincarnation does by bringing forward memories and behaviors and things like this from previous life, even if subconsciously, it helps us when we return to our new lives, our new bodies, particularly if we return to areas close by where we lived, like Indian cases I was talking about, right? And in fact, in Stevenson's research, one of the things he found was that most often the reincarnation is within the same geographical area, and very often within the same cultural group, the same ethnic group, linguistic group. If we come back, in the same culture, speaking the same language, having those experiences in the past helps us adjust to our present, gives us a leg up, as it were. And conversely, what we see in these cases is if the past life is too different, as it was for Dorothy Eady, right? She remembered Egypt, and she was born in the UK. And she wasn't happy in the UK after she began having those memories. That's why she went back to live in Egypt, right? We see this often with these international cases. If the difference between the life recalled and the present life is too great, then the children often have various kinds of problems. They don't like the weather, they don't like the food, they have trouble adjusting, and they're not happy until they can get back to the places that they remember if they're able to. So it does look like that reincarnation sort of favors being reborn in the same culture, right? And in that case, being reborn in the same culture, and even if subliminally recalling the past, having that a part of us, helps us adjust to the present. I think it's that more than reincarnation being about spiritual growth. Maybe in some ways, but if we have to think of reincarnation as being something that has been with us from the beginning, right? And do we really want to talk about bacteria reincarnating for spiritual growth? Why are they still bacteria then, right? So I think when we look at it that way, we have to, maybe for humans, it becomes about spiritual growth, but not for all life.
If one life gets cut early, do you think they come back to complete their mission or soul contract?
Well, yeah, if we put it in a certain way, I don't like those terms. I realize that they're really popular terms, and I understand what people are getting at with them. Stevenson put it in terms of unfinished business because what he saw in his cases was that they almost all had some sort of unfinished or continuing business to them. Lives are cut short, right? Very often. People are killed, they die by disease, they die by their own hand. The lives are cut short. And when lives are cut short, there is this unfinished business, right? And that does carry over, right? And we see this in all sorts of ways, like women who die young, die leaving young children. I mean, they want to get back to their kids, understandably, and so the girls, boys too. I mean, who remember being women who died leaving young children behind. I mean, they're pressed that presses on their minds, to convey that, to get back to their kids. In fact, one famous case, Jenny Cockell, it was like this. I mean, again, another British case. She remembered a life in Ireland, was actually able to go back and verify it and get in touch with their children that she had left when she died before. So, um, yeah, so that's part of it. Another way, and very interesting way, that we get this unfinished business is that sometimes in these societies, and remember, I mean, we're talking about 1960s when Stevenson was investigating it, and so like, in a lot of these societies that he was studying, you're talking about village life. There are no banks there, right? There's no, not all the ways that we have of storing our money. And so, particularly a wealthy person will hide their valuables, hide their money. If they don't tell somebody where it's hidden before they die, this is a problem. Well, some of these kids remember having hidden valuables. And, in fact, an appreciable number of them, over a dozen or so of these cases. The kids talk about this, right? And they want to show people where this stuff was buried or hidden. So that's another type of unfinished business, which is in the subconscious and presses on the subconscious enough that the children become consciously aware of it and then speak about it.
In my findings, the time span often that he found between lives was 500 years.
Yeah, I know. See, this is the sort of stuff you get with the regressions. And it's one reason why those in my community, serious reincarnation researchers, don't work with regressions. We work with spontaneous memories. The intermission, but the median, and the median means that there's many longer as shorter, right? So the median intermission in a sample of Stevenson's cases, not he studied 2,500 or so this isn't all of them, but several hundred of his cases that he examined for this particular study found a median intermission of, get this, 15 months. Now, those are mainly Asian cases because he worked mainly in Asia and India and Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand. These cases in the Middle East. It's a little bit longer in the West, but not all that much longer. With Ryland, it was 25 years. And that's about the median of American stranger cases, right? It's a whole lot longer, obviously, with Dorothy Eady, but her case is not a solved case in the term we use that in the way we use that term. We use solved when we've actually been able to identify a specific deceased person, as I was able to identify Jennifer as being Ryland, right? The person Ryland was reincarnated from. It's not the same with Dorothy Eady. It was too far back in time. There's no way to know who exactly she was talking about.
How can we recognize people from our past lives in this life? Because sometimes I feel a soul connected to random people, like their soul feels familiar.
Yeah. A lot of people have this feeling. In fact, I've had this feeling. I've run into somebody that I felt really that I was connected to. It turned out, I mean, maybe we were, because it turned out that we both have family history in the same area, and so maybe we were connected in the past, So I know the feeling that is being talked about, right? Because I've experienced it. How does this come about? Well, like I say, if Stevenson is right, that and this is what his data shows, this isn't just, if Stevenson's data is correct, let me put it that way, in its suggestion that we tend to reincarnate in the same geographical area, right? Because as well as time, as well as the 15-month intermission, is also the 25-kilometer. That 25 kilometers is only 15 and a half miles. That is the median distance between lives. Okay, so we're talking about past lives that very often are very close by. Now, in countries like the United States, which are so much larger, the distances are larger. The distance between New Orleans and, in Oklahoma was more than 25 miles in Ryland's case, but it's still within the same culture. It's still within the United States, right? So, yeah, so in both the distance and the time between lives, it's not great, right? If we all do this, if we all come back routinely in the same place and not too long, there's no surprise that we would run into each other again, right? And I think we recognize each other psychically. I think it's at a psychic level, and that comes up. That's how I explain all that.
We can recognize people's energies.
Yeah, we recognize, subconsciously, and it becomes sort of a conscious awareness, but we're not sure quite how because it's still the subconscious element. Sometimes it's accompanied by conscious memories that come maybe in our dreams, maybe in waking state, but it's not always. No, we don't always have these memories to go along with it. Sometimes it's just this feeling.
I want to share something with you, and I have to be respectful to the people it involves. So I gotta word it right. But there's, I was reading Journey of Souls and I was getting into everything. And one morning I woke up and it hit me. I was like, of course, this person is this person. So in this family, one passes away, right? And then 9 months later, another is born into that same family. They left young, and then this next child was born. So I went into a conception calculator, right, and typed in the birth date, and it went back 9 months, and it had lined up. The conception date was the day to the day of the latest conception it could have been, to the day of that death. In Journey of Souls, it talks about how if one's life is cut short, they will often be reincarnated into their siblings' family.
Yeah, on both counts. Reincarnation can be it can be the same day. It can be, I mean, Stevenson has cases like that, actually, here. One case where it was just a few hours, but cases where it was, only a few days. Yeah, and as far as reincarnating in the same family goes, we see that often. We see that very often. Interestingly, more in Western European and American cases than we do in Asian ones, and Eastern ones. For some reason, I'm not sure quite why that is, but we see a higher percentage of these family cases. Also, another thing related to that is if somebody dies at the same time somebody else in the family is pregnant, the child born of that pregnancy will very often be the deceased. And this is why come back. And this is why, it can line up that. But here we're talking about conception and not birth. Right. I'm sorry. I jumped to, when I was talking about the intermission, I jumped to birth, but you're talking about conception, which, yeah. So actually that's a different issue than what I was talking about. But let me address that one too, because that also is a very interesting issue. I'm sorry, I confused myself there, jumping to birth rather than conception. Right. There seems to be, and my term for this is discarnate agency. There seems to be the ability of this discarnate consciousness, spirit, to think and to act and to do things deliberately, including, incredibly enough, bringing about a conception. So it may not be simply coincidental that the person died at the same time the new body was conceived. The person may have died and brought about the conception.
I don't know if this goes into your research, but do you often find that the reincarnated soul chooses their parents?
Yeah, not always. I mean, sometimes the impression given is always, but no, not always. And the reason I say that is that we have a good deal of what we call intermission memories. In about 20%, so not an insignificant number of them, in about 20% of cases where children remember previous lives, and these are live memories that are confirmed, they'll also remember the intermission period between the lives. And so they talk about that very often. And one of the things that they would talk about is how they came to choose or how they came to their new parents. They don't always, but sometimes, but very often they do. But this is the important thing here. So sometimes they say, yes, I chose my mother for one reason or another. Other times they say that there was an assisting spirit of some sort, a non-human assisting. Sometimes it's human, sometimes a relative, but most often it's a non-human assisting spirit that got involved by showing them options, right? And they chose one of those options, right? So they're still choosing their mother, but not, but from this set of, usually it's three options, right? So it's a circumscribed set, right? And when that happens, it's usually not a family member, it's a stranger that's chosen. And it can be the father also that's chosen, not just the mother. Okay, I'll let you choose which question to ask me next.
Yeah, I'm reading this one. Before I conceived, I was done having kids, and my stepsister had a dream that my stepmom went to her with a baby girl, saying, "This is Emily's daughter." A few months later, I felt this deep urge to have another baby.
Okay, so felt the urge to have another baby. I'm not sure quite what that means. Was she pregnant at the time or not? Anyway, yeah, that dream is what's called an announcing dream, and they turn up often in these cases. Their dreams, often the mothers will have them maybe shortly before they become pregnant, maybe while they're pregnant, but others, their husbands or you know close friends, relatives can have them too, as in this case. Now, these announcing dreams often have symbolic elements like bringing a baby, presenting a baby. And sort of, but when one way or another they communicate a reincarnation, right? And that's what this sounds like. So the announcing dream returned was to her mother, and said that Emily is going to have this child, even though Emily thought she was done having children, and then she becomes pregnant and sure enough has this child, which seems to be indeed the person who was sent the announcing dream. Yeah, that sort of thing is quite common, actually.
Can we talk about your how many do you have one book?
I have two. Actually, my first one was co-authored with another researcher named Erlander Haraldsson, who is an Icelandic researcher. He worked with Stevenson pretty closely. Um, uh, and he and I talked for years about doing the book together, and it just never really happened. And then at the end, when he decided that he wanted to pull his reincarnation papers, because he published his cases in journals, when he wanted to pull them together in a book and didn't really have enough to make a full book, he asked me if I'd like to join as a co-author. And at the time, I was writing my other book, and I kept putting him off and saying, "Yes, I want to do this," but I didn't really have time to focus on it. I wanted to do this other first, and so he went on and he wrote his part of the book, his first two-thirds of the book, as it turned out, and so and then left another third for me. Um, so I wrote the last third of the book. And so our plan had originally been to write a book together, like people normally collaborate on a book. But the way this developed, he wrote his part and then I wrote my part, which actually works quite well. It's called I Saw a Light and Came Here, Children's Experiences of Reincarnation. And then my other book, I Saw Signs of Reincarnation, exploring beliefs, cases, and theory, is the one I was working on at the time and eventually finished.
Let me ask you a few questions. I ask everyone and wrap this up. What's your definition of the meaning of life?
What's the definition of the meaning of life? Well, that's a new one. I mean, usually people stay focused on reincarnation, the meaning of life, the meaning of life. Well, I guess I would answer the meaning of life for me is the same with the meaning of reincarnation. Life is reincarnation. And I don't think you can separate them, really. I mean, I think, life is really about consciousness, right? I mean, yes, I mean, there's the biological, physical aspects too. But for any physical body to be viable, I mean, not just animals, I think any physical body to be viable, it has to have a consciousness to it too. And when there's not the consciousness, we get stillbirths, things like that, right? So life for me means consciousness, right? And consciousness means reincarnation. So, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is the same as the meaning of reincarnation, really. Uh, and the need for consciousness just continuing to exist in a series of different
If you had one last message for the world, what would it be?
grow up, I guess. And that's not to the world in general, but to science, to the academic world in which I live part of the time, 1 foot in the academic world, 1 foot in the popular world. Come to terms with this, please. Realize that reincarnation really is a thing. And that the sooner we get there, the better, because until we really understand reincarnation and understand the impacts that it has on us, we can't really understand life. We can't really understand what we go through. We can't really understand ourselves or other people. We can't really understand society. And so we need to come to terms with that. And the sooner psychology comes to terms with it, sooner biology comes to terms with it, the better, in my view.
All right, Allied, I'm not ready to wrap this up. I have a few questions that I don't ask everybody, and they're coming to me because, first of all, I want to ask: do you believe that do you believe in past life traumas or not traumas, karmas? Do you believe one issue can
Yeah, I
go
can.
to the
Yeah,
next?
well, yes and no. I mean, the no is not in the traditional sense of karma as an external law and effect, right? Where you're punished or rewarded for your deeds. I don't see that at all. I don't think it's but if we look at karma as an internal process, and as it turns out, I mean, if you look at the more esoteric Eastern ideas about karma, they get to this too, that karma, if you think of karma as a psychological thing, as an internal thing, as something that's personal thing, yes, we see a lot of evidence of this sort of thing carried over. That if we carry guilts over, they affect us, right? Uh, if we have things that we need to resolve, we better resolve them, otherwise they can continue to bother us. So in that way, yes.
Um, and this will go into my last question, but I want to know how this got started. You have, I would say, the biggest and maybe only um, reincarnation group on Facebook. It has, I would say, 375,000 people in it, right?
Yeah, yes, growing, but it's not the only. I mean, I don't know how many there are now, maybe a dozen or so.
But it's pretty big.
Yeah, and it wasn't the first either. I mean, it started off, there were others. There were at least two others at the time, but we've outgrown them. Yes, we're quite large now.
How did that come about?
Good question. Probably a combination of factors. Maybe that people are. I think one major factor is that people have just become more interested in talking about this, more comfortable in talking about it, and so that's much broader than my group, much broader than Facebook. I think it's a social media phenomenon that people has become more comfortable. They're looking for a place that they can share these things. Now, what makes my group different? Why has it grown so large? From the beginning, well, okay, so at the beginning, my concept of the group was to let people know about this research because the research has been going on for a long time now, right? For 60 years, 60 plus years, and yet it's really not very well known. So I wanted a place to bring all the researchers together, and most of them were on Facebook at the time, and in a way for us to talk and then to let people know about the research. And I was surprised at the reception and how many people came in wanting to share their memories. Because from the beginning, I said no to regressions. I said, we're not going to be about regressions. And I said that what we're going to do in this group, because we want it to be an educational group, is we're going to have admins respond to every post, and we still do. We respond to every post. We review every post. We don't accept everyone. Those that if they're off target, if they're, it has to be about spontaneous cases. It has to be a decent question about reincarnation. Then we accept it. We answer it. And then we allow other people to talk about it. But I think that's what makes us different. And maybe it's that difference that attracts people, that we're bringing the research, because it's called Science of Reincarnation, just like my book, but then the subtitle is Experiences and Research. So we're encouraging people to talk about their experiences, but we're also bringing it back to the research. And that's what makes us different, and maybe what's attractive about it. I don't know.
It's kind of what I enjoyed about your group is when I find a post which is a tough question that most people might not be able to answer. I'll click, and it could be like 5 minutes old, and I'll click on it, and Jim Matlock has already been there and answered it in detail, and it's made sense. And then, like you said, and then you allow people to put their input in too, but you're able to go to these questions and immediately you've answered with a well-researched answer.
If it's reincarnation related, yeah. I mean, if it's
Right.
not reincarnation related, then we just don't allow it. But if it's a reincarnation related question, health or otherwise, yeah, we'll answer it and we'll take it. And look, I mean, you know what? I'm 71 this year, and I've been in this since, reading on this stuff since 1980. I mean, or this, so most of my adult life, I've been at this, and more than 40 years now, I've been at this. And so over that time, I guess I've learned a lot.
This is your life and your passion.
Yeah.
All right. My final question is, how can people reach out to you and find your book? If you want people to reach out, how can they?
If they're on Facebook, that's the easiest way. I'll give my email. It's simply JG, if that's for James G or Jim G, Graham, Matlock, Matlock, just jgmatlock at yahoo.com. I mean, they're welcome to email me. I also have a website, and you can look me up on the web, and that's just jamesgmatlock.com.
And what's the name of the Facebook group?
Signs of Reincarnation. So if they're on Facebook, come to Signs of Reincarnation on Facebook.
I want to thank you for accepting my invite and taking the time out of your day to figure this stream out, first of all, and having this conversation.
Sure, no problem. I appreciate it, Tyler. And I enjoyed talking to you too.
Thank you guys for joining us today. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't. Share out this video to whoever it resonates with. And if you're not on TikTok yet, please come and join us on our TikTok live streams. It's a great place to hear near-death experiences every day. These are ordinary people with extraordinary experiences, and you never know what's coming up next. So I encourage you to come join our community over there. It's a very loving place, and we'd love to have you. Also, if you want to teach your children the values of near-death experiences, you can check out The Light You Are on Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description. Make sure you love yourself so you can love others, because when we love others, they can love themselves. And just in case no one's told you today, I love you.